everyone, we are back for day 2 of my 4-day live stream series, and today is going to be really exciting because we're focusing on indie publishing today. We're going to talk about a lot of launch stuff. So if you haven't already watched yesterday's video, go back and do that first because we covered, basically we covered everything about traditional publishing. So if you're interested in traditional publishing or anything to do with that, or even just querying agents or trying to figure out if it is for you, then that's the video to go watch first. And it's also going to help you to figure out, who I am and what I do, because I won't go over that every time we go live. And that's in case you're new here. But today we're going to talk about something completely different. So this day is for anyone who is in the author stage or sometimes even in the published author stage. So that's really, like, the qualifier for that is basically that you are looking into publishing, you really want to publish, you want to learn the publishing steps, you're trying to figure out if it's for you, and basically it can also apply if you have published, but your launches aren't as successful as you hope they would be, so you're trying to figure out what you might have done wrong. There is some information in today's video that will help you with that as well. Hi everyone who's joining live. I'm so excited that everyone's actually joining live today. Okay, now before we begin, I do have a few things to do. First of all, I'm going to quickly go ahead and drop that quiz again. So if you're watching today's video and you're not sure if today's video is for you, there is a quiz that I have, I'm dropping it every day of the week, that will help you to figure out what stage of the author journey you're at. And I believe there are 4 unique stages that authors go through. So if you're really stuck and you want to make sure that you're watching the right content, this is the quiz to take. It's in the comments below. And I'm going to go ahead and answer a question from yesterday's video before we get too much further, because I just want to make sure that anyone who's watching these replays also gets to hear the questions as they get answered. So Selma asked a question. She asked, how do I actually go and look for an agent or a publishing house? And is there a specific process in picking a publishing house or an agent? So that's a really excellent question. And there are 4 places you can go looking for these kinds of things. So I'm going to list them out for you. You've got Twitter. Twitter has a great publishing community. There's lots of agents on Twitter. There's lots of publishing houses on Twitter. I would be using it primarily for agents, but there are, editors from publishing houses that lurk on there as well. And it's the best way to find legitimate people, because when you go Googling things, you can find stuff through Google, but you often come across, those vanity publishers that I mentioned yesterday, because they're quite good at ranking high. So you just want to be wary of that. But you can Google it. You can also go to Publishers Marketplace, and I think you have to be a paying member to get access to all of the publishers and agents, but you'll always see the top 20 in the right-hand side, so you can go look in there. And you can also check on Manuscript Wishlist, which is also a credible source for where you can find agents, editors, and publishers. Now that is the key, is you really do want to make sure it's a credible source. So make sure you do your research, and that really applies to the process as well. Do your research. So there's not really any hard or fast rules for how to go about getting signed with a publisher or an agent, other than make sure it's the right person. So if you do your research, you will be able to contact people who are the right fit. The other thing I want to mention here, especially if anyone's experiencing lots of rejections, it's not always about you, it's not always about your book. Sometimes it's a case of that they already have too many similar books. I think I mentioned that yesterday as well. Sometimes there's too many similar books. Sometimes it's not quite the right fit. Sometimes it's a great book, but they personally don't feel a connection to it, so they know they would struggle to market it to someone, or they don't have the right audience for it, or they weren't able to convince their CEO that it was marketable. So, oftentimes it's not actually about your book not being well written or not being a great idea. It's just that the industry has its own rules that I talked about yesterday, and they just make up all these rules. So I wouldn't let it get to you too much, because there will be someone out there that is the perfect fit for you. And I also want to quickly mention, actually let me finish off before I get into that story. So the other things I wanted to mention is getting clear when you do your market research on who are similar authors and similar books to yours, because what you can do is you can go look in the front matter in the copyright section, and you can find publishers that way that have clearly published similar books, so it's obviously a great fit. So that's another tip for you as well. Now, what I wanted to mention real quickly, like I said yesterday, I've been signed on 2 different occasions by traditional publishing houses, and I've also self-published, so I've done it both ways. But what happened is there was like a 3-year gap between the two. So the first time I did it on my first query ever. It was a good fit because I did all my research. And then the second time it happened was 3 years later, and in between there was a lot of rejections. And what happened is when I signed with my publisher the second time, that was the same year that they actually opened doors to their publishing house. So they didn't even exist in the space of time that I was actually querying other places, because they didn't even, like, I didn't even know that they would exist, right? So it was impossible for me to sign with a publisher who was clearly a perfect fit for my book, because how could I? They didn't exist yet. So my point is, if you're getting lots of rejections, it doesn't mean that someone out there isn't going to take on your book. It could just be a matter of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you can't be in the right place at the right time if you stop showing up. So my advice for you is to keep going and stay consistent, because if you give up, then you'll never get it at all. But if you keep going, eventually something is going to shift. So that is my little piece of motivation for you today. Okay, so let's get into the actual content of today. While I'm chatting, feel free to drop any questions you have about indie publishing down in the comments below, and I'll go ahead and answer any questions that you might have along the way right at the very end. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is which publishing pathway is actually best. And you may have realized I'm a little bit biased, because obviously after my experiences, I really prefer self-publishing. And I really try to stay neutral when I talk about it, because I recognize that for some people, it's actually a better fit for them to traditionally publish. So I'm never going to be like, this is the one way that's the good way. It's just that for me personally, it's better for me to self-publish, which I've realized after some time. So when I first started publishing, I was really set on traditional publishing, because I think everyone kind of experiences this thing where they feel like they haven't quite made it in the publishing world, or they haven't quite been validated that their book is good enough until they've had a traditional publisher say, yes, we want your book. It's kind of like this holy grail ego kind of thing, right? But the truth is that there's literally no difference in both ways. Like, the only difference is that someone else is publishing your book if you traditionally publish, and you're publishing the book if you self-publish. That is it. The strategies do not differ at all, so how can one way be wrong when the other way is exactly the same? So what I really learned after starting my own business and helping authors is that for me, it's not a good fit because I'm very entrepreneurial minded, and I don't like limitations, I don't like deadlines, I don't like contracts, I don't like things that make me feel like I don't have control and options over what I can do. And on top of that, I do get quite busy, so it's quite hard for me to be on top of deadlines sometimes, which I totally recognize. That's not to say that being traditionally published hasn't been a fantastic help, because it has helped me to publish my fantasy series, which is 7 books long, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without support behind me. So a publisher does take care of a lot of the things. They take care of the editing, the cover design, the formatting, the uploading, and while I do a lot of the marketing steps, they do take care of a lot of those things for me, so it's a lot that's taken off my hands, and I do recognize that as well. So in that sense, it has been very helpful, but I know that moving forward, it's not the right fit for me, which is why I won't be doing it again. And that's just one example of like why it's not a good fit, but it has still been helpful. So I'm not saying at all that, you know, it's not the right thing to do. But I do want you to sort of consider this quite carefully, because like I said yesterday, if you're someone who has a really demanding job, or you've got family responsibilities, and you really can't see yourself committing to editing deadlines, then it may not be the best fit. Like, for example, my first publishing house, which I was only with for a very short time, they wanted edits in a 1-week turnaround. A 1-week turnaround. And that was while I was working a 9-to-5, and that was also really, really stressful. My second publisher, they give me a month turnaround, which is much more easier to do, and I sometimes still don't make it on time, which I try to, but that's like, you know, it's just a lot more doable. So it also depends on who you're signing with, and sometimes you don't know what that's going to be like until you actually sign with them, so it's just something to be aware of. So I would really be making a lifestyle choice, and I'd be looking at your lifestyle, looking at what you're looking for, what you're going to need to make it happen, and remember that this is your dream, this is your ambition. You get to do it however you actually want to do it. You don't need someone else to tell you that your book is good enough, and you don't need someone else to help you make it happen. It's just that you need to recognize which way do you want to do it, because you can outsource the help that you need. You can delegate. You can, find help groups and whatever you need to make it happen on your own, especially if you recognize that going through a publisher is not going to be a good fit for whatever reason. So that is just my little riff on that. But I will say here, and I think you've already understood this, but I truly believe that if you are of the entrepreneurial mind as an author, if you enjoy business, if you like to have control over things, if you enjoy marketing, maybe you work in a marketing role, I really can't see traditional publishing being a great fit, because I think it just clashes too much. I just think it doesn't mesh well. And that I might be wrong depending on your personality, but in my personal experience and what I've seen, that tends to be the case. So I will put that out there. Let's go ahead and talk about a couple of the reasons why I actually love indie publishing. And I have at least 8 reasons here. So the first one is obviously that you get a higher royalty. And I think you've figured out by now, especially from yesterday's conversation, that you're going to earn way more from self-publishing, which means you're getting more compensated for your efforts. You're not having people profit off of your ideas, and that might be fine for some people, but it really depends on how you feel about that. Another thing here is that it allows you to have the creative freedom lifestyle that you actually want. So this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but a lot of your New York Times best-selling authors that are with big publishing houses and obviously sell heaps and heaps of books every year, they're still in a 9-to-5 because they still can't afford to go full-time with their books. Despite selling so many books, the fact that they earn such a small royalty just doesn't make it possible for them. So if you want to actually have more time to write books in your schedule, if that's something that you truly crave, and this was something that I truly craved when I was in a 9-to-5. I hated that I would get all these great ideas while I was at work and I couldn't write them, and then by the time I got home I was too drained and tired to do it. So it was really important to me that I was able to write when I actually felt inspired, that I was able to just take the day off and do it if I wanted to. So that was really important to me. And obviously we can't do that if we don't have the financial compensation to make that happen in our schedule. So by you earning a higher royalty, that allows you to be able to do that. It allows you to create more of what your readers want and get it out there faster for them. So that's one reason. The next reason is that you have creative control, and this has proven to be important in my personal experience with publishing houses. So it's not a hate on my publisher at all, but I do, there was like an incident within my first or second year with them, I don't remember which one, but my first editor who worked on my first book didn't really get my book, which was obvious right from the very start, but I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to rock the boat. And then we got to the novella and they came back, like I remember I got edits back for the novella and there was no edits in the manuscript, and I was like, have I got the right file? So I contacted, the person who was dealing with it and said, hey, is this an error? And they were like, oh, there's literally no edits. They just didn't do edits for your book because they didn't think there was anything wrong with it. And so what they ended up doing was switching my editor. And then the second editor came back and had tons and tons of edits to give me because obviously it did need editing. So sometimes, you get assigned people who aren't the right fit for your book because they're the only people available, or they believe that's the best fit for your book, when it really should be up to you, I believe. So I think that you should have that amount of creative control where you can pick who's working on the projects with you. And yes, sometimes you get lucky with a publishing house who's willing to change that for you. But if that's not the case, then you're really stuck with the situation. And this is your creative project that you spent years on, and you feel like it's not going to work out. It's not going to be the best that it could because you've had this contract obligation to work with these people who don't understand your book. So it becomes this kind of creative problem, right? So if you are able to pick your own editors and cover designers and people who work on the projects with you that you trust, that makes a huge difference. So that's something that I also really like about being in control of who I pick. Another thing is the flexible schedule, which we've talked about, having the schedule to do whatever you want. If you decide, I don't want to launch 4 books this year, I want to launch 1 book this year, then you can space it out the way you want to, and that's totally fine. Sometimes, let's talk about this. So I believe that there's from indie publishing, you get a sense of accomplishment, obviously, because it's a really cool thing for you to be like, oh my gosh, I published this book all by myself, and I did all the things and all the steps, and I organized all the team members, and that's a huge deal. Like, I think that's it's something to be really proud of, and it makes you feel even more worthy of the book royalties that you're earning from that. So I think it can be really great to do that. Along with that comes this sense of responsibility, which you may not see as a good thing up front, but I personally think it's the best, because what happens is, again, if you're with a traditional publisher and let's say that they aren't doing the right things towards your book, you're kind of stuck with that situation. So I know from listening to industry experts that sometimes you get people who it's their job to go sell your book to a bookstore, right? Like, that's their job. They're a salesperson. And if they don't like your book or they don't think it's going to sell well, then they just won't mention it, right? So they won't actually try and sell it to a bookstore, which means that someone's doing a disservice towards your book. The thing is, you are the biggest advocate for your own book. You are the only person who can back it, who can be confident about it, who can pitch it and promote it, and really make it as good as it can be. So if you are relying on other people and contractually obligated to rely on other people who aren't doing the right thing by your book, that becomes very frustrating and limiting. And it can happen in lots of roles. It can happen, when you're trying to get books to a school, or you're trying to send an invoice, or you're trying to liaise to get your books into a bookstore. It can happen in lots of other situations as well, and it can just be really frustrating to deal with. But the good thing about being responsible for your own success is that you have the control to do anything that you want. So yes, it can be disappointing when you can't meet your own expectations, but at least you know it was you. At least you're not in a situation where it's like, if only I could do this thing, then I would have success, because, you're kind of stuck dealing with other people. So I think it's a good thing to have that level of responsibility, because you know that you can always change it. You know that you're in control of yourself, and you can always improve and get better results for yourself. So I think that's a really good thing. Let's see. So I also believe that you have way less limitations when you self-publish. You obviously don't have to wait for a certain time period to put your book out, or you don't have to ask for permission to invoice a school. You don't have to do all these things by the rules. You can just do it as you feel inspired and called to do it, which I think is great. And it's not actually that hard, to go out and publish your book, even though it might feel that way, and especially when you're learning the ropes, it can feel that way, but really there's not a lot to it. So it's very easy to pick up the basics and then just improve your skills from there until you really have a handle on it. So I know it can feel like this really daunting, scary thing to go out there and self-publish something, but it's really not. And especially with the right teachers and, resources to help you, that can make it so much easier. So let's talk about publishing versus launching, because there is a difference, and this is something that I see a lot of authors get really tripped up with. So I believe that when you publish a book, it's 15% publishing and it's 85% marketing. And the problem I see is that authors don't understand that publishing and launching are two different things. And so they realize that, I can upload my book to Amazon, it can be out in 72 hours, so I can just publish my book this weekend, which happens a lot. I come across a lot of authors who do this, and they think, I've officially published my book, that was really easy. The publishing steps are easy, they don't take a lot, and they are quick. You can do them in a very short amount of time. The problem is that that's not a proper way to launch something. A launch is a completely different thing, and a launch is a marketing strategy, right? So the reason that traditional publishers take up to 9 months to get a book out is because they're launching it. So when I got signed with my publisher, it was 2 years before my book came out and hit shelves, because one, they had all these other books that they had to publish first, but then when they started actually working on my book, there was this whole lead-up process so that they could properly launch it, right? And that's why it became a best-selling book. So the thing is, if you're not taking those steps and you're not going through the right process, then of course you're not going to launch your book properly. It's probably going to flop as a result. You're not going to see the sales that you want, the audience that you want, and then you've gone and spent all this money on editing and cover design, and you've really wasted your good opportunity to earn a lot of that return on investment back. That's not to say that you can't earn it back. Obviously you can market until the cows come home, until you earn your investment back. But the thing is, a launch is a cash injection. Okay, so a launch is when you pull all of your efforts towards a single event or goal. And the point of that is that you earn your investment back in a really fast, short amount of time. Because obviously, it's much different when you put all your marketing efforts towards a single day of the year instead of waiting for the sales to flow through over time, right? So hopefully that's making sense. Let me know if you need me to re-explain that. But let me go ahead and just explain a little bit further about this. So when I teach launch strategy, I teach that basically you have the launch strategy and then you have the evergreen strategy. And the evergreen strategy is what comes after your launch, after it's out in the world, because evergreen means that something's available, you know, until it's no longer relevant. And your book will always be available and purchasable, so it's always relevant. So a lot of authors make the mistake of diving straight into evergreen strategy because they upload their book, they publish it in such a short amount of time, and then they go, oh, now it's out, now I need to market it somehow. And they haven't done any pre-marketing efforts, so they just dive straight into doing whatever they can think of. The thing is, what I teach in my courses and programs is a really strategic process that will help you to launch properly. It's this whole 5-step process. The publishing steps themselves are 12 steps, and that's a whole different thing. But I break that down further into a 5-step, or I call it like a phase process, that helps you to clarify what marketing efforts you're doing at each stage. So just to help you break this down, you've got the pre-launch phase, then you've got the production phase, the preparation phase, the promotion phase, the launch phase, and then the post-launch phase, and that's the entire process. So there's something that you need to be doing at each of those stages in order to have a really successful launch. And you'll notice that there's like 4 or 5 stages before your book actually comes out, and that starts months and months before your book comes out. I remember stalking Shelby Marin's page when she launched Stepin and Dove, and she started her marketing efforts 16 months before the book came out. So her official announcement, and that's step 1 that I teach, is you announce your book. Her announcement was 16 months before the book came out. And then in that time, she had a whole launch process and how she built up her marketing efforts and her audience. So the thing that happened to me when I first self-published my book back in 2016, this was my first book. It was the first one I self-published. It was a flopped launch because I didn't spend time building an audience, and I gave myself a month and I thought that would be enough, and it totally wasn't. So I went ahead and I did all the things. I, hired an editor and a cover designer, and I did a launch party, and I marketed my book on social media for a good month, and it all wasn't enough because I didn't go through the strategic process and I didn't give myself enough time to build up my audience. So it's really, really important that you understand that you need to give yourself time and you need to be taking the right steps at every stage of the process to have a really successful launch that's going to bring in the sales that you want to see. And even if the goal is not for you to make sales, if your goal is just to get your book out there so people can read it, let me ask you this. Are you going to be happy if it's just your friends and family that read it, or do you want more people to actually discover it? Because the thing is, if your book isn't selling, it's not getting discovered. It's not getting seen by people that you want to be reading it. And it's not going to be your ideal readers reading it. It's just going to be people in your general community who want to support you, and that will eventually die down. And then you've only reached like maybe 20 people, which is probably not as impactful as reaching a few thousand people with your book. So I want you to really think that through. And so that is basically why it's so important that you understand the difference between publishing and launching, and it's something I teach a lot further in my programs and courses. Now, let me also go ahead and break down all of the publishing steps for you. So if you're new to publishing, you have no idea how to publish a book, what I'm going to do really quickly is run you through my 12-step launch process. And what that also, hang on, I said that wrong. What I would recommend is that if you listen to this process and you want to understand more about each step of the process, I have a book that can really help you. So I wrote an ebook called The 12-Step Book Launch Strategy. In it, I teach you about publishing, I teach you about launching versus evergreen, I teach you about my process for going through the launch, like the whole launch stages, basically how I warm people up to buy from me over a period of time. And then I go through all of these steps that I'm about to tell you, and I teach you what you should be doing during each of these steps, specifically how to do it. So it's basically a how-to and how to launch. It's not really a how-to and how to publish. So if you're not sure about publishing, I have courses for that too. But it will teach you how to launch a book. So it's a really good resource if you want to learn more. So what I'm going to do is quickly walk you through this. So what we have is you start by announcing that your book's going to be published, obviously, because if you don't tell people and then you just drop a book on them, they're going to be like, what is this? I didn't know this was happening. So you need to tell people, and preferably with the release date. Then you want to have your book edited, and I always tell my students and clients that if you can't afford editing and cover design, you can't afford to publish yet. And I know that might be really hard to hear, especially if you want to get something out there or you feel like it's just not possible otherwise, but let me tell you, people are exchanging their hard-earned money to purchase your product, and if it's not up to standard, if it has typos, then they're not going to be happy with that. And I think you'd want your readers to be satisfied with what they're purchasing. On top of that, it is their first impression of your author brand. So if they pick this up and they don't like it, they don't think it's good enough, they don't think it's substandard compared to all the other books out there, then that's going to leave a really bad first impression, and they're probably not going to read anything from you ever again. So if you want to build this lifetime customer value with your readers, you really want to make sure that you're putting your best step forward every time. So there are things you can do. You can pay off editing over time. You can do payment plans. You can, negotiate. There's also cheaper editors out there. There's lots and lots of things you can do to make it doable for you, but I definitely recommend giving yourself a bit of time to save up first. So have your book edited, have your book cover designed, and then you go ahead and you reveal your book cover, and that should be an event. That is a milestone in your launch process. So a lot of people might drop their book and be like, here it is. You should have a little bit more build up, hype it up, tell people it's coming, build a launch team, have people helping you, because this is a big thing. Your cover is branding for your product, and it's going to help people to identify that your book is a real thing. They're going to associate your book with that cover, and every time they see that cover, it's building a brand impression. And once they get 7 to 8 brand impressions with you, they're going to start remembering your book. They're going to start seeing it everywhere and going, everyone's talking about that book. So it's a really important piece of marketing material, so you definitely want to make this a big thing. Now, you also have the step where you have your book formatted so that it's ready and readable, and you can read it on any device. Then you go ahead and you send out your ARCs for review. So an ARC is an advanced reader copy, and this is the step where you're sending books out for free in exchange for an honest review so that you can build up some credibility before your launch day. And sometimes there's a little bit of confusion around this. So some people ask me, should I do this, before or after I have my final version or my formatted version? Or should I have betas look at it after I've edited? No. So basically, anything like betas and critique partners and alpha readers should come before your first professional edit. There's no point in editing if they come afterwards, because then you have to go back and do more editing when you've made changes. It just doesn't make sense. And then the other thing is that with the ARC reviews, that should come after the book's been formatted, because they want a version of it that they can actually read, and it should be the most final version possible. So it's okay if you make like 1 or 2 more changes, but you don't want to be changing like the whole story, because then the version that they've reviewed is not the same version. So make sure that those steps are followed like in order. Then you've got your Amazon keyword research. So this is the step where you actually make your book optimized to be discoverable and found online. So it's really important that you go through and do this properly. It's a whole process. I tell you how to do it in my book. But basically it's just this. If you do it manually, it can take you a few hours. If you do it the way that I teach you, it can take you an hour, and it's a lot easier. But it will help you to rank on Amazon and get discovered in short terms. Now, then you upload your book files to online distributors like Amazon. This is Amazon KDP, this is Draft to Digital, this is Ingram Spark, anything like that, where your book is uploaded and ready to be distributed and purchased online. And this is technically that publishing step. So this is the publishing step. This is like the 15%. So that is how you do that. Then you enable your pre-orders. So I often hear some mixed opinions on pre-orders. Some people tell you that you shouldn't do them. Some people say that they're great. I am personally for pre-orders as someone who understands marketing and does marketing every day. So a lot of people will say that pre-orders will mess up your sales, and it's not, they don't work with authors, people don't pre-order stuff. Here's the thing. If you are going through a launch process and you are building up for people to buy your book, and it does take time to do that, to build an audience and everything, if you're going through that process, then what do you do when you're 3 months away from your book being released and someone is warmed up enough to buy your book, but you don't give them an option to? What do? Because they might not be on your email list, so they may not get notified when your book is actually available. If you don't have an option for them to purchase at that moment when they've decided that they want to, then you're going to lose that sale, because the chances of them remembering when the book actually comes out is pretty slim. They might, go find another book that they enjoy more, or they might forget that you even exist in that time. So you really want to make sure that when people hit that point that they're ready to purchase, they can at least pre-order so that they can do that. So pre-orders are really vital. Plus, they really help just to build up your sales for release date anyway, because remember, this is a cash injection. You want to make as much sales as possible on your book's release date and the release week. Okay, now you also want to make sure that you do any launch events. So this can be online or offline, and it doesn't have to be like a total book signing tour event. It could be a virtual release day party, it could be a live reading, it could be an Instagram takeover, but events help you to appear credible, and they also help you to market your book and get it out there. So I do recommend doing events, and I give you a whole list of events that you can do in my book, by the way. And then you can send out press releases. So this is a really big thing. I've been featured in over 20 plus media and publications, including Writer's Digest. And I made front page news for my books multiple times, like quite a few at this point. And so the reason is because I learned how to write a really great press release. And I've told you how to do this in my book as well. But basically, the first time I did it, I totally messed it up. But then after that, I was really good at it. So when you send a press release, you want to make sure that you're doing that, because that's going to help you to get reported on by media outlets and help people to know that your book's coming out. And that's one of the final steps that you do. And then you have a final check through everything, and I tell you what to check over in my book. And then you go ahead and launch. And that's really as easy as it is, but that's over a series of months. So I recommend giving yourself about 3 months to do that whole process, if not 9 or longer, depends on how long you want to take to launch. But no less than 3 months unless you've already started doing some of those steps, because otherwise you're just rushing it, you're not giving yourself enough time, you're not giving your audience enough time. So that is the whole process that I teach for, publishing and launching your book, and then I further break that down into marketing phases in my other programs and courses. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just link a few things that will help you. The first thing that I want to link is a free resource. So this is a free checklist. If you went through and listened to all those 12 steps and you were trying to scribble like notes, trying to record everything that I was saying, here's a checklist of all the 12 steps so you don't have to do that. So you can go ahead and download that for free. And then if you want to check out the book, if you are listening and you're like, oh my gosh, this sounds amazing, I need to know more about this whole thing, then here is the book. So it's called 12-Step Book Launch Strategy. And when you purchase directly through me, you'll get all the versions of the book available. So you won't just get like an Amazon version, you'll have all the versions so you can easily access it no matter where you're reading it from. And yeah, it's pretty great. So I would definitely recommend taking a look at that if you are interested. That is there in the comments for you too. That's pretty much everything I wanted to drop today. I'm just double checking. And I think that's everything I wanted to talk about as well. Let me just double check. I'm pretty sure that was. So if you have any questions, and if you're watching the replay and you have questions, now is the time to drop them in the comments. And tomorrow we're going to talk about some different stuff. So we're going to talk about author mindset, we're going to talk about marketing, we're going to talk about income and how to actually create consistent income in authorship. So there's lots of good juicy stuff tomorrow. But I will hang out for a few more minutes to see if we have any questions. Let me go ahead and check the comments as well. So we have Rebecca is liking my whole explanation about my publisher. Publishing has become easier and easier with each book. It does so, yeah. So like, I know that like my first book, obviously that was a flop, right? I ended up re-releasing it a few years later. And then I'm now on to my 7th book, and the whole process is so easy for me now because the more you do it, the better you get at it. Rain says, the best coaches make it easier too. Oh. I mean, you could be talking about any coaches here, but I know that we've worked together, so. But yes, I totally agree as well. Like, I'm not just tooting my own horn. I work with coaches as well. coaches make a huge difference, and it's one of my biggest regrets that I didn't hire a coach in my first year of business. I mean, I hire them for business purposes. Honestly, I can tell you the amount of things that I've picked up on now that a coach could have just told me in my first year or helped me to recognize, and how much further along I'd been by now if I had a coach. It's just mind-blowing to me. I'm like, why didn't I do that? That was like the stupidest thing I ever did. So having a coach is such a game changer. Rain also says the ebook is a great step-by-step resource for beginners and published authors alike because I've read it. That's great to hear. Actually, while I'm sitting here, maybe I'll just read a few reviews because I don't see any questions, so I don't think we have any. Basically, I did get lots of great reviews for this. So I am new to the game of writing and the world of launching and publishing, and I tried to do my own research over the last few months, but I was struggling to understand the order and timing of how and when things had to be done. In the time it took me to commute to work today, I finally found the answers. So that is a part of someone's review from Gertie. And I totally agree, because one of the biggest things when I was starting out in authorship, this is like why I do my job, because I struggled so much trying to Google stuff, trying to figure out everything, because there's so much information out there. The problem is that there is too much information out there, none of it is clear. Everyone has a different piece of advice to give you, and really there's this big misinformation gap between it all on what you actually should do in the actual process for it. That's why I started my business, became a coach, and create the programs that I create, because I want to make it clearer and easier for authors to understand this stuff and go through it. And this ebook is just one way that I've done that. So I'm really glad that they found it helpful. Let's see what else is here. So Emma says, as someone who has already launched a book and knows about most of these steps already, I was looking for a bit more depth, but if you have not launched yet, this book is perfect for you, which I think is also a great observation, and I do mention that on the sales page. Like, it is a beginner's book. It's made for beginners. If you're looking for something more advanced, I have courses and programs for that kind of thing. So it's definitely written for people who've never done it before. And Caitlin says, let me find something here. This book has given me many new insights into things I never considered when trying to plan my own book launch. And I'm pretty sure they said something else too, but I can't find it because I'm just scanning through. I remember someone said, this might have been in a different review, someone said that they discovered things that they hadn't already known about publishing as someone who had published as well. I can't remember who said that. It must have been on a different page. But a lot of people have read this and found it super helpful. So definitely recommend checking it out if you want to. But that's all I have for today, so I'm going to wrap this up. Especially because Rain says there's no questions. So if you guys liked today's video, let me know down below if it was helpful, and I'll be back tomorrow for another day of awesome content. So I'll see you guys then.